Hello and welcome back to the Private Audiobooks channel. The audiobook topic in this video is how to become more articulate and confident. If you're ready, let's move on to the video. Chapter 1: Why is expressing yourself so difficult? The art of speaking from within. You've probably noticed it before. That moment when you want to say something meaningful, something true, and yet the words seem to dissolve before they reach your lips. Or perhaps they come out tangled, uncertain, nothing like the clarity you felt inside just seconds earlier. This isn't a failure of vocabulary or a lack of intelligence. It's something far more fundamental, something that lives beneath the surface of language itself. Most people believe that speaking well is about mastering techniques, about learning how to project your voice or structure your sentences with rhetorical precision. They think confidence comes from rehearsal, from memorizing opening lines or studying the gestures of charismatic speakers. But this approach misses the essential truth. The way you speak is not separate from the way you think. Your words are not independent of your inner state. When you struggle to express yourself, the problem is rarely in your mouth. It's in your mind. Consider what happens in those moments of difficulty. You're about to speak, and suddenly there's a flood of secondary thoughts. Will they understand? Does this sound foolish? Am I saying too much or too little? These questions arise so quickly that you barely notice them, yet they create a subtle turbulence beneath your words. Your original thought, which was clear and simple when it first formed, now has to navigate through this storm of self-evaluation. By the time it emerges as speech, it's been distorted, weakened, sometimes lost entirely. This is the fundamental challenge of self-expression. Not the words themselves, but the interference between thought and speech. And the source of that interference is almost always the same thing, appearing in different disguises. It's the need to be validated, the fear of being diminished, the constant measuring of yourself against some imagined standard. You're not just speaking. You're simultaneously trying to control how you're perceived, predict how you'll be judged, manage the impression you're making. No wonder the words come out tangled. Think about the times when speaking felt effortless. Perhaps you were talking with someone you trust completely, someone whose presence doesn't trigger that evaluative mechanism in your mind. Or maybe you were so absorbed in an idea that you forgot to monitor yourself. In those moments, there was a directness to your speech. The thought formed and the words followed, naturally, without interruption. This wasn't because you suddenly became more articulate. It was because the interference disappeared. The channel between your thinking and your speaking was clear. The fear people experience around speaking has very little to do with the actual act of speaking. A child speaks without fear, without calculation, because they haven't yet learned to divide their attention between what they're saying and how they're being seen. They haven't developed that interior observer that sits in judgment, comparing every utterance to an ideal. But as we grow, we accumulate experiences of being misunderstood, dismissed, or criticized. We learn that words have consequences, that other people are evaluating us, that there's a right way and a wrong way to express ourselves. And so we become careful. We become controlled. We become afraid. But here's what's crucial to understand. That fear isn't protecting you. It's creating the very problem it claims to prevent. When you speak from a place of fear, trying to manage every word, your natural intelligence can't function properly. You become stiff, calculated, artificial. People sense this immediately, even if they can't articulate what they're sensing. They feel the tension, the holding back, the lack of genuine presence. And paradoxically, this makes you less effective, less convincing, less connected than you would be if you simply allowed yourself to speak naturally. The speed at which thoughts move is another crucial factor that most people don't recognize. Your mind generates ideas, associations, and insights far faster than your mouth can articulate them. This is normal. This is how consciousness works. But when you're anxious about speaking, you try to capture everything, to translate every nuance of your thinking into words. This is impossible. And the attempt creates a bottleneck. You're trying to force a river through a straw. The result is hesitation, confusion, a sense of being overwhelmed by your own thoughts. What you need instead is discrimination. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Not every detail needs to be articulated. Effective speaking requires you to distinguish between the essential and the peripheral, to let go of the branches and express the trunk. But you can't do this while you're drowning in self-consciousness. You need a certain spaciousness of mind, a certain ease, to see clearly what's worth saying and what can be left unsaid. This kind of clarity doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from relaxing your grip. There's also the matter of silence, which most people profoundly misunderstand. They treat silence as emptiness, as a gap that needs to be filled, as evidence of inadequacy. So they rush to fill every pause with words, often words that add nothing, words that actually diminish what came before. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is where thought forms. Silence is where meaning settles. When you speak and then pause, truly pause, you give both yourself and your listener space to absorb what was said. You create rhythm. You create emphasis. You allow the words to land. But this requires trust. Trust that you don't need to perform constantly, that your value isn't measured by the continuous production of words, that people will stay with you even if you take a moment to think. Most people don't have this trust. They've learned to equate silence with failure, so they chatter nervously, afraid that any pause will expose them as uncertain or unprepared. And in doing so, they create exactly the impression they're trying to avoid. Because nervous speech is transparent. People can hear the anxiety beneath it. They can feel the desperation to fill space, to prove something, to avoid judgment. The approval of others exerts an enormous influence on how we speak, often entirely unconsciously. You think you're just explaining an idea or telling a story, but underneath, there's a constant monitoring system checking for signs of approval or disapproval. A slight shift in someone's expression, a moment of distraction, and suddenly your confidence wavers. You start to second-guess what you're saying, to modify your message mid-sentence, to hedge and qualify and retreat from your own assertions. This happens so quickly that you barely notice it, but it fragments your speech, makes it tentative and unclear. This need for approval operates like a subtle form of begging. You're not just communicating. You're also asking, is this okay? Do you accept this? Do you accept me? And people sense this, even if they're not consciously aware of it. They sense that you're not standing behind your words fully, that you're ready to retreat if they show signs of disagreement or judgment. This doesn't inspire confidence. It doesn't create connection. It creates a kind of awkwardness, a sense that something's not quite right, even if neither of you can name what it is. But here's the deeper issue. When you speak from this place of needing approval, you're not actually speaking from yourself. You're speaking from a projected image of what you think the other person wants to hear. You're trying to say the thing that will make them like you, respect you, validate you. And in the process, you lose contact with your own truth. Your words become diplomatic, careful, designed to avoid offense rather than to communicate clearly. And the irony is that people generally respond better to someone who speaks honestly, even if they disagree, than to someone who's clearly performing for approval. There's a particular form of insecurity that doesn't announce itself loudly. It's not the obvious nervousness of stammering or blushing. It's quieter, more insidious. It shows up as a slight hesitation before you speak, a tendency to soften your statements with qualifiers, a habit of checking people's faces for reactions before continuing. It shows up in the way you laugh nervously after saying something serious, as if to say, I don't really mean that fully, I'm not that committed to what I just said. These are tiny betrayals of your own voice, small ways you undermine yourself before anyone else has a chance to. And here's what's important to recognize. These patterns are not fixed. They're not who you are. They're habits of mind that developed over time, usually as protective responses to past experiences. Maybe you were shut down when you tried to express yourself as a child. Maybe you were criticized for speaking up, or ignored, or made to feel that your thoughts weren't valuable. These experiences create patterns, ways of protecting yourself from similar pain in the future. But protection comes at a cost. It keeps you safe, but it also keeps you small. It prevents pain, but it also prevents authentic expression. The path forward isn't about learning new speaking techniques or practicing confidence tricks. It's about recognizing these patterns, understanding where they come from, and then gradually relaxing them. It's about seeing that the fear is based on old experiences, not present reality. It's about noticing when you're about to speak and that familiar tightness appears in your chest, that voice in your head that says, "Be careful, you might say the wrong thing." And instead of obeying that voice automatically, you pause. You feel the fear, acknowledge it, and then speak anyway, from a deeper place than that frightened voice. This isn't easy. It requires a kind of courage that has nothing to do with bravado. It's the courage to be ordinary, to risk being misunderstood, to let your words land however they land without trying to control the outcome. It's the courage to trust that your natural way of thinking and speaking is sufficient, that you don't need to be more impressive or more careful or more anything other than what you are. And paradoxically, when you stop trying so hard to be impressive, you often become more impressive. Not because you're performing impressiveness, but because you're present, authentic, undefended. What would it mean to speak without that underlying current of fear? Not fearlessness in the sense of never feeling anxiety, but fearlessness in the sense of not letting fear dictate your expression. You'd feel the nervousness, notice the old habit of monitoring and controlling, and simply let it be there without giving it power. You'd speak from what you actually think, not from what you think you should think. You'd allow pauses, allow uncertainty, allow the natural messiness of real communication instead of trying to perform some impossible standard of perfect articulation. This is where real speaking begins. Not in techniques or strategies, but in the dissolution of the barriers between your inner clarity and your outer expression. And that dissolution happens through awareness, through seeing clearly how you've been interfering with yourself, and then gradually, patiently, learning to stop. It's a process of subtraction, not addition. You don't need to add confidence or charisma or persuasive skills. You need to subtract the fear, the approval seeking, the self-judgment that's been blocking your natural capacity all along. The question isn't how to become a better speaker. The question is what's preventing you from speaking clearly right now, in this moment. And once you see that clearly, not just intellectually but viscerally, in your actual experience, something begins to shift. You start to recognize the pattern as it's happening. You feel the tightening, the monitoring, the fear, and instead of being swept away by it, you see it. And in that seeing, there's space. Space to choose differently. Space to speak from somewhere deeper than fear. Space to discover what your voice actually sounds like when it's not being filtered through layers of self-protection. This is the foundation. Understanding that speaking difficulty is not a technical problem requiring technical solutions, but a psychological pattern requiring awareness and patience. In the coming sections, we'll explore how to work with this awareness practically, how to create the conditions for clear thinking that naturally leads to clear speaking. But first, this recognition had to be established. The problem is not your mouth. It's not your vocabulary. It's not even your anxiety, really. It's the way you've learned to relate to your own voice, to treat it as something dangerous that needs to be controlled rather than something natural that wants to flow. And once you understand that deeply, everything else becomes possible. Chapter 2: Clarity equals Trust. There's a widespread misconception about confidence that causes more confusion than clarity. People think confidence is something you project, something you perform, a kind of outer shell you construct through posture, tone, and carefully chosen words. They believe you can fake it until you make it, that if you simply act confident, you'll eventually feel confident. And while there's a grain of truth in this approach, it misses the deeper reality entirely. Real confidence, the kind that people intuitively recognize and respond to, doesn't come from outside. It comes from an inner state of clarity. And clarity is not something you can fake, not for long, not in any way that truly matters. When you think clearly, you speak clearly. This sounds simple, almost obvious, yet most people have never truly examined what it means. They assume they think clearly already, that the problem is just in the translation from thought to speech. But if you pay attention, really pay attention to what happens in your mind before you speak, you'll notice something revealing. Your thoughts are often fragmented, contradictory, overlapping. You have the main idea, yes, but it's surrounded by doubts, qualifications, alternative phrasings, concerns about how it will be received. All of this happens in a fraction of a second, so quickly that you don't consciously register it. But it's there, creating static, creating interference between what you mean and what you say. Imagine trying to pour water from a vessel that's being shaken constantly. The water comes out erratically, splashing, missing the target, creating mess instead of flow. This is what happens when you try to speak from an unclear mind. The thought itself might be sound, might even be brilliant, but it's being jostled by anxiety, by self-doubt, by the need to impress or avoid criticism. So what comes out is erratic, tentative, unclear. And people sense this immediately. They might not know what's wrong, they might not be able to put their finger on it, but they feel it. There's something off, something that prevents them from fully trusting what you're saying, something that makes them question whether you really believe your own words. Now contrast this with a moment when your mind is genuinely clear. Maybe you're explaining something you understand deeply, something you've thought through so thoroughly that there's no confusion left, no ambiguity, no hesitation. Or maybe you're speaking about something you care about intensely, where the emotional truth is so strong that it cuts through all the secondary noise, all the self-consciousness and second-guessing. In these moments, your words flow naturally. You don't have to search for them. You don't have to monitor yourself constantly, adjusting your tone or your phrasing mid-sentence. The thought forms and the speech follows, directly, simply, powerfully. This is not because you've suddenly become more articulate or more skilled at speaking. It's because the channel is clear. There's no interference between your thinking and your speaking. This is what confidence actually is. Not a performance, not a mask, not a set of behaviors you adopt, but a natural byproduct of mental clarity. When you know what you think, when you've sorted through the confusion and arrived at something solid, something you can stand on, you speak with conviction. Not because you're trying to sound convincing, not because you've practiced sounding authoritative, but because you're convinced. You've done the work of thinking things through, and now you're simply expressing the conclusion of that work. And people respond to this in a way they never respond to performed confidence. They might not agree with you, they might challenge your ideas, but they respect you. They sense that you're speaking from a real place, not from calculation or fear or the need to appear impressive. But here's where it gets interesting, where most people have this exactly backwards. They think confidence creates clarity. They believe that if they can just project confidence, speak with authority, adopt the mannerisms of powerful speakers, then their thinking will somehow become clearer, their ideas will crystallize, their message will sharpen. But it doesn't work this way. It can't work this way. Projected confidence without inner clarity is hollow. It's a shell with nothing inside. And people see through it eventually, even if they can't articulate why. There's a brittleness to it, a defensiveness that emerges when questioned. When challenged, it collapses or becomes aggressive, because it has no foundation. Real confidence, the kind that comes from clarity, is flexible. It can absorb questions, entertain doubts, adapt to new information, because it's not defending an image. It's simply expressing what is. So the question becomes, how do you create mental clarity? This is not a trivial question. Your mind, like everyone's mind, is subject to constant turbulence. Thoughts arise continuously, without asking permission, without regard for whether you want them or not. Associations form automatically, memories intrude unbidden, emotions color everything, changing the meaning of facts, altering the weight of different considerations. And on top of this natural activity, there's the learned habit of self-judgment, the voice that comments on your thoughts as you're thinking them, evaluating whether they're good enough, smart enough, appropriate enough, original enough. This voice is exhausting. It fragments your attention, splits your mental energy between thinking and judging your thinking. And it's this splitting, this division of attention, that destroys clarity more than anything else. Consider what happens when you sit down to think through a problem, any problem. Maybe you're trying to understand a difficult situation at work, trying to figure out why something went wrong or how to move forward. Or maybe you're trying to figure out how you feel about a relationship, whether something that bothers you is significant or trivial, whether you're being reasonable or oversensitive. Or maybe you're trying to form an opinion on some complex issue, something political or philosophical, where there are good arguments on multiple sides. If you're like most people, your thinking is chaotic. You start with one thread, follow it for a moment, then jump to another, then remember something else that seems relevant, then worry about whether you're thinking about it correctly, then get distracted by a completely unrelated thought. You might spend an hour in this kind of mental wandering and end up more confused than when you started. This is not because you're incapable of clear thinking. It's because you haven't learned to think deliberately, to direct your attention rather than being pulled by it in every direction. Clear thinking requires a kind of mental discipline that has nothing to do with force or control. It's not about suppressing thoughts or trying to make your mind blank or forcing yourself to concentrate so hard that everything else disappears. That approach usually backfires, creating more tension, more resistance. The discipline required is softer than that, more subtle. It's about learning to observe your thinking process itself, to notice when you've drifted off course, and gently, without self-criticism, bring your attention back to the question at hand. It's about creating enough spaciousness in your mind that thoughts can unfold naturally, without being interrupted by anxiety or self-judgment or the constant pressure to arrive at an answer immediately. And this spaciousness comes from a very simple practice that almost no one does. Stillness. Silence. Taking time to simply sit with a question without rushing to answer it, without filling the space with more and more thoughts, without performing the activity of thinking. Just sitting there, holding the question lightly, allowing whatever needs to arise in its own time. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with this kind of mental stillness. They equate thinking with mental busyness, with generating thoughts rapidly, with filling every moment with cognitive activity. The idea of just sitting quietly with a question, not actively trying to solve it, feels like wasting time, like being lazy or unproductive. But this kind of thinking, this busy, frantic, constantly generating kind of thinking, rarely produces clarity. It produces noise. It produces more confusion disguised as productivity. Real insight, real understanding, often emerges from the opposite state. From a mind that's quiet enough to see clearly, patient enough to let things settle, spacious enough to allow new perspectives to arise that couldn't emerge in the midst of all that mental noise. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to stop thinking, which is impossible anyway. It means allowing your thinking to slow down naturally, to become less frantic, more deliberate, more spacious. It means giving yourself permission to not know immediately, to sit with uncertainty, to let understanding develop at its own pace rather than forcing it. And here's what's remarkable: what changes everything once you discover it. When you speak from this kind of clarity, from a mind that's genuinely settled, everything about your communication changes. Your pace is different. You don't rush. You don't feel that anxious pressure to fill every gap with words, to keep talking so no one notices you're uncertain. You allow pauses, natural breaks where the thought can breathe, where you can check whether you're still aligned with what you're trying to express, where your listener can absorb what you've said before you move to the next point. These pauses feel dangerous at first. They feel like admissions of uncertainty or weakness, like gaps in your armor where people can see that you don't have all the answers. But they're not. They're signs of confidence. They communicate that you don't need to perform continuously, that you trust your message enough to let it stand on its own without constant reinforcement, that you're not afraid of silence because you know what you have to say is worth waiting for. Silence, in fact, is one of the most powerful elements of effective communication, yet it's also the most misunderstood and underutilized. Most speakers treat silence as something to be avoided at all costs. They fill every moment with sound, whether meaningful or not, because they've learned to associate silence with failure, with forgetting what you were going to say, with losing the audience's attention, with appearing uncertain or unprepared. But watch truly confident speakers, people who have real authority not because of their position or title but because of their presence, because of who they are. They pause frequently. They take time to think before responding to questions. They let their words land, let them sink in, before moving to the next point. And these pauses don't diminish their authority. They enhance it. They make people lean in, pay closer attention, value what's being said more highly because it's not being thrown at them in an anxious rush. Why is this? Because silence creates space for meaning to register. When you speak continuously, your listener is always processing, always trying to keep up with the flow of information, always slightly behind, trying to catch up while new information keeps coming. They don't have time to really absorb what you're saying, to feel its significance, to let it connect with their own understanding or experience. But when you pause, you give them that time. You allow the message to sink in, to settle, to be considered. And you also give yourself time. Time to sense whether you've been understood, time to let the next thought form fully before expressing it, time to maintain contact with your own clarity rather than getting swept away by the momentum of speaking, by the performance of being someone who knows what they're talking about. But using silence effectively requires something most people lack. It requires you to be comfortable with not knowing immediately, with uncertainty, with the possibility that you might not have a perfect answer ready to go. Most people speak to avoid this discomfort. Someone asks a question, and they immediately start talking, not because they have a clear response but because silence feels intolerable, because they believe they're supposed to have instant answers, because they're afraid that any pause will be interpreted as ignorance or weakness. So they fill the space with approximations, with half-formed thoughts, with rambling explanations that go nowhere, that circle around the question without really answering it. And the result is that they sound uncertain, unclear, unconvincing. Not because their ideas are bad, not because they lack knowledge or intelligence, but because they haven't given those ideas time to clarify before expressing them. Imagine a different approach. Someone asks you a question, and instead of immediately responding, you pause. You take a breath. You let yourself feel the question, really feel it, rather than reacting to it automatically with the first thought that comes to mind. You allow your mind to settle enough that a clear response can form, that you can sense what's actually true rather than what sounds good or what you think the person wants to hear. This might take 3 seconds. It might take 10 seconds. In a conversation, 10 seconds of silence can feel like an eternity. But in that silence, something remarkable happens. The noise subsides. The anxiety about how you'll sound diminishes. The need to impress or avoid looking foolish loses its grip. And what emerges is often much clearer, much more direct, much more true than anything you would have said in an immediate, reactive response. This is what separates people who speak with genuine authority from people who merely perform authority. People with real authority are comfortable with not knowing immediately. They can sit with a question, think it through, and then respond. They trust that this pause, this moment of consideration, will produce something more valuable than an instant reaction. People performing authority can't afford this. They believe they need to have instant answers, impressive responses, seamless explanations that never hesitate or stumble. So they rush. They perform. They say what they think they should say rather than what they actually think. And the performance is exhausting, both for them and for everyone listening, because everyone can sense on some level that something's not quite real, that there's a gap between the words and the person speaking them. Mental confusion manifests in speech in very specific ways, and once you learn to recognize these patterns in yourself, you can start to address them at the source. You can hear confusion in the excessive qualifiers, the constant hedging. Someone who isn't clear on what they think will say things like, "Well, I sort of think that maybe this could be, kind of important, in a way, perhaps." Every word in that sentence is an escape route, a way of avoiding commitment, a signal that the speaker doesn't really stand behind what they're saying. They're protecting themselves, leaving room to retreat if challenged or disagreed with. Compare this to someone speaking from clarity. This is important. 3 words. No qualifiers. No hedging. The difference is not in vocabulary or rhetorical skill. It's in the level of certainty behind the words. And that certainty comes from having actually thought things through, from having arrived at a clear understanding rather than trying to speak before the understanding is there. You can also hear confusion in the circular patterns, the repetition. Someone who doesn't know what they're trying to say will often repeat the same point in slightly different ways, hoping that eventually they'll stumble upon the right formulation, that one of these variations will capture what they mean. They're thinking out loud, which can be valuable in the right context, in a conversation where exploration is welcome, but in most situations comes across as muddled and uncertain. Clear thinking produces clear structure. You make your point once, directly, and then either elaborate on it with examples or evidence or move to the next point. You don't circle back obsessively, restating the same idea 5 different ways because you're not confident it was expressed well the first time. Another telltale sign of mental confusion in speech is the inability to distinguish between essential and peripheral information. Someone who hasn't clarified their own thinking will include everything, every detail, every tangent, every qualifier, because they haven't done the work of figuring out what actually matters. They'll tell you what happened, but also what almost happened, and what they thought might happen, and what someone else said about what happened, and how the weather was that day, and oh by the way there's this other thing that's sort of related. And by the end of this rambling account, you've lost track of the point, if there ever was one. Clear thinking involves discrimination. It involves seeing what's central to your point and what's merely adjacent to it, what supports your meaning and what distracts from it. And this discrimination is impossible when your mind is chaotic. You need a certain stillness to see the structure of your own thoughts clearly, to recognize which elements are load-bearing and which can be removed without loss. This is why people often speak better about topics they've thought through extensively. It's not just that they know more facts, though that helps. It's that the prolonged thinking has created clarity. The various aspects of the topic have settled into a coherent structure in their mind. They've worked through the contradictions, resolved the tensions, understood the relationships between different elements. So when they speak, they're not trying to figure it out as they go. They're expressing an understanding that's already there, already formed. And this pre-existing clarity manifests as confidence, as authority, as the sense that this person knows what they're talking about. But here's the crucial insight that changes everything. You don't need to be an expert on a topic to speak clearly about it. You just need to be clear on what you actually think about it, even if what you think is that you don't know much. Someone can know very little about a subject but speak with perfect clarity about their limited understanding. I don't know much about this topic, but my impression based on what I've read is X, and I'm curious about Y, and I'm uncertain about Z. This is clear. This is honest. This is confident in a deeper way than false expertise could ever be. Because it's not trying to be more than it is. It's simply expressing what's actually there, without embellishment or pretense or the need to sound more knowledgeable than you are. The problem is that most people confuse clarity with certainty, and they confuse confidence with having all the answers. So they feel they can't speak clearly unless they know everything, can't project confidence unless they're absolutely certain, can't appear authoritative unless they never admit doubt or ignorance. But this is backwards. Real clarity often includes uncertainty. Real confidence includes the ability to say, I don't know without apologizing or diminishing yourself. What matters is not whether you have definitive answers, but whether you're clear about what you do and don't know, what you're certain of and what you're questioning. This kind of clarity is rare. Most people are muddled about their own state of knowledge. They think they understand things they don't, accept explanations they haven't really examined, and doubt things they actually do understand but lack confidence in expressing. So how do you develop this clarity? The answer is both simple and demanding. You have to actually think. Not just have thoughts, which happens automatically all day long, but deliberately work through questions until you arrive at clear understanding. This takes time. It takes patience. It takes a willingness to sit with confusion rather than rushing to premature conclusions, rather than accepting the first plausible answer that comes to mind. Most people avoid this. They prefer the comfort of vague opinions to the discomfort of rigorous thinking. They'd rather have an approximate answer immediately than work through to a precise answer over time. But the price of this avoidance is perpetual uncertainty in their speech, a constant sense of not quite knowing what they're trying to say, of words that don't quite capture the meaning, of explanations that don't quite satisfy. Practical thinking, the kind that produces clarity, involves asking yourself questions and refusing to move on until you've answered them honestly. What do I actually think about this? Not what should I think, not what sounds intelligent or sophisticated, not what would impress other people, but what do I actually think? And if the answer is I don't know, then the next question is, what would I need to understand to form a clearer view? What information am I missing? What perspective haven't I considered? What assumption am I making that I haven't examined? This kind of self-interrogation is uncomfortable because it exposes the gaps in your understanding, the places where you've been relying on received opinions or vague impressions rather than real thought. But it's only by exposing these gaps that you can fill them, only by recognizing your confusion that you can move toward clarity. And as your thinking clarifies, your speech clarifies automatically. You don't have to practice speaking skills. You don't have to study rhetoric or take courses in public speaking. The words simply become more direct, more precise, more powerful, because they're expressing something solid rather than something nebulous. People notice this immediately. They might not consciously think, this person has clarified their thinking. But they feel the difference. They sense that you're not performing, not calculating your words to create an effect, not trying to impress them with sophisticated vocabulary or complex sentence structures. You're simply saying what you mean, and meaning what you say. And this creates trust in a way that no amount of charisma or rhetorical skill could ever achieve. There's also something important to understand about the relationship between calmness and authority. Most people think authority comes from force, from loudness, from dominating the conversation, from speaking over others, from never backing down or admitting error. And in some contexts, this crude form of authority works, at least temporarily. It can intimidate people into compliance. But it's fragile. It depends on maintaining the performance, on never showing weakness, on constant assertion and reassertion. And it creates resentment, resistance, the desire to see the person fail. Real authority, the kind that endures, the kind that people genuinely respect rather than merely fear or resent, comes from a completely different source. It comes from stillness. From the ability to remain calm when others are agitated, to think clearly when others are reactive, to speak with measured certainty when others are speaking with anxious volume. Watch someone who has real authority in a crisis. They don't shout. They don't rush. They don't fill the air with urgent words. Their voice might actually become quieter, more deliberate. They slow down. They create a sense of spaciousness around the situation, a feeling that even though things are difficult, there's room to think, to consider options, to respond rather than react. And this calmness is contagious. It settles others. It creates the conditions for clear thinking and effective action. This is not a technique. You can't fake this kind of calmness because it comes from actual inner stability, from a mind that isn't being overwhelmed by the situation, that has enough spaciousness to hold whatever's happening without collapsing into reaction or panic. And here's what's crucial to understand. This calmness, this inner stability, is not something you're born with or not born with. It's not a personality trait that some people have and others lack. It's something you develop through practice, through learning to observe your own reactivity without being controlled by it, through creating enough space in your mind that you can choose your response rather than being compelled to react automatically. Every time you pause before speaking, every time you take a breath instead of immediately responding, every time you allow silence instead of filling it with nervous chatter, you're practicing this stability. You're training yourself to operate from a calmer, clearer place. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes, until eventually it's not something you have to remember to do. It's just how you are. And as this becomes more natural, as your baseline state becomes calmer and more settled, your speech changes fundamentally. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer feel compelled to fill every gap, to have immediate answers, to perform confidence or expertise. You can simply be present with whatever's happening, think clearly about it, and respond from that clarity. And this natural, unforced way of speaking carries more authority than any performance could ever achieve. Because it's real. Because it comes from an actual state of inner clarity rather than from anxiety about outer impression. So when we say that clarity equals confidence, this is what we mean. Not that clear thinking makes you feel confident in some emotional sense, though it often does. But that clarity itself is confidence. When you know what you think, when you've sorted through the confusion and arrived at understanding, you naturally speak with conviction. You don't need to add confidence as a separate ingredient, like adding spices to a dish. It's already there, inherent in the clarity itself. And people recognize this instantly. They might not be able to articulate what's different about the way you speak, but they feel it. They sense that you're not performing, not trying to convince them of something you don't believe yourself. You're simply expressing what you understand to be true. And that authenticity, that alignment between inner clarity and outer expression, is what real confidence looks like. This is why working on your speaking skills without working on your thinking is ultimately futile. You might learn techniques, you might become more polished in your delivery, you might even become quite good at performing confidence. But you'll still have that underlying instability, that sense of not quite standing behind your words fully, of hoping people won't ask too many questions or probe too deeply. But when you work on clarity, when you develop the capacity to think through things deliberately and arrive at genuine understanding, the speaking takes care of itself. The words become more direct. The pace becomes more natural. The authority becomes effortless. Because you're no longer dividing your attention between what you're saying and how you're being perceived. You're simply present with your own clarity, expressing it as clearly as you can, and trusting that this is enough. Chapter 3, Articulation, the Mind Before the Words. When people talk about articulation, they usually mean the physical act of speaking, the way you form words with your mouth, the clarity of your pronunciation. But this is a superficial understanding. Real articulation has nothing to do with how precisely you move your tongue or how clearly you enunciate consonants. Real articulation happens before you open your mouth. It happens in the moment when a thought becomes ready to be expressed, when the mental image crystallizes into something that can be shared through language. And this process, this transformation from inner understanding to outer expression, is where most people struggle without realizing it. You've probably experienced this. You have a complete thought in your mind, something you understand perfectly, and then you try to explain it and the words come out tangled. Or they come out fine but they don't capture what you meant. Or they capture part of it but miss something essential. And you end up saying, "That's not quite what I meant," or "Let me try again," and you make another attempt that's slightly better but still not right. This frustration is universal. Everyone experiences it. But very few people understand why it happens. The problem is not that you lack vocabulary. It's not that you're not smart enough or educated enough. The problem is that the thought itself, while it feels clear to you, hasn't been processed in a way that makes it communicable. It exists in your mind as a kind of compressed understanding, a feeling of knowing, but it hasn't been unpacked into the linear structure that language requires. And when you try to speak it without doing this unpacking first, you're essentially trying to pour something shapeless into a container that requires shape. The result is mess. Think about how thoughts actually exist in your mind. They're not verbal. They're not linear. They're more like clouds of meaning, clusters of associations, felt senses of understanding. When you think about a person you know well, you don't think in sentences. You have a kind of holistic sense of who they are, what they're like, how they make you feel. But if someone asks you to describe this person, you have to translate that holistic sense into words, into linear statements that follow each other in time. And this translation is not automatic. It requires a kind of work, a processing that most people skip because they don't realize it's necessary. Fluent speaking is not about speaking quickly. It's not about never pausing or never searching for words. Fluency comes from having done this translation work before you speak, from having converted the compressed thought into something that can flow naturally into language. When this work is done, speaking feels effortless. The words come easily because they're following a path that's already been cleared. But when this work isn't done, when you try to think and translate and speak all at the same time, that's when you stumble, hesitate, lose your train of thought. So the foundation of articulate speech is not speaking skill. It's thinking skill. Specifically, it's the ability to simplify your thoughts, to take that complex cloud of meaning and find the essential core, the part that can be expressed simply and directly. Most people never do this. They try to communicate the entire cloud, all the nuances and qualifications and side thoughts, and they end up overwhelming both themselves and their listener. But if you can identify the core, the one thing you're really trying to say, then everything becomes easier. You have a clear direction. You know what you're building toward. And even if you need to add nuances later, you have a foundation to build on. This is a skill, and like any skill, it requires practice. But the practice is not in speaking. It's in thinking. It's in taking time before you speak to ask yourself, what am I actually trying to say here? If I could only say one sentence, what would it be? What's the essence of this thought? This kind of mental discipline feels unnatural at first because we're used to speaking immediately, used to letting thoughts flow out as they arise. But that habit is precisely what creates inarticulate speech. When you pause, when you take even a few seconds to clarify your thought before expressing it, your speech becomes dramatically clearer. And here's something most people never consider. Speaking less can make you more articulate, not less. There's a common belief that articulate people speak a lot, that they always have something to say, that they fill space with words. But this is backwards. Truly articulate people often speak less than others because they've learned to distinguish between thoughts worth expressing and thoughts that are just mental noise. They don't feel compelled to share every observation, every opinion, every reaction. They wait until they have something clear to say, and then they say it clearly. And this selectivity makes their words carry more weight. The power of saying less but saying it clearly cannot be overstated. In any conversation, in any presentation, in any attempt to communicate, there's a limit to how much people can absorb. If you speak constantly, if you pile idea on top of idea without pause, without giving people time to digest, most of what you say will be lost. People will remember a general impression but not the specifics. But if you make one clear point, if you express one thought with precision and then stop, that thought has space to land. It has a chance to be remembered, to be considered, to create impact. Think about the speakers who have influenced you most. Chances are, they're not the ones who spoke the most. They're the ones who said something that stuck with you, some phrase or insight that was so clear, so precisely expressed, that it embedded itself in your memory. This clarity is not accidental. It comes from the discipline of simplification, from the refusal to speak until the thought is ready, from the trust that one clear statement is worth more than 10 vague ones. But simplification is difficult because it requires you to let go of things. When you have a complex thought, you want to communicate all of it. You want to capture every nuance, every qualification, every aspect that seems important. And in trying to include everything, you end up communicating nothing clearly. Simplification means choosing. It means deciding what's essential and what can be left unsaid, at least for now. It means trusting that a partial truth clearly expressed is more valuable than a complete truth muddily expressed. This is where most people resist. They feel that simplifying means lying, means being reductive, means losing the complexity that makes the thought interesting or true. But this is a misunderstanding. Simplification is not about dumbing things down. It's about finding the clearest path to understanding. You can always add complexity later, once the foundation is established. But if you start with complexity, if you try to communicate everything at once, you create confusion rather than understanding. The ability to simplify requires that you understand your own thought deeply. You cannot simplify something you don't fully understand. This is why confused thinkers are always complicated speakers. They include everything because they don't know what matters. They can't distinguish the essential from the peripheral because they haven't done the work of understanding the structure of their own thought. But when you really understand something, simplification becomes natural. You can see what the thought rests on, what supports it, what's fundamental and what's decorative. This brings us to the question of pauses, which we touched on earlier but need to explore more deeply. Most people experience pauses as failures, as moments when they've lost their train of thought or don't know what to say next. And certainly, pauses can indicate confusion. But they can also indicate the opposite. They can indicate that you're thinking, that you're not content to speak automatically, that you're taking time to ensure what you say next is worth saying. And these two types of pauses feel completely different, both to you and to your listener. A confused pause is characterized by tension. You can feel your mind scrambling, searching desperately for the next word, the next thought, anything to fill the silence. Your body tenses. Your eyes might dart around. There's a sense of emergency, of needing to rescue yourself from this awkward moment. And your listener feels this tension too. They become uncomfortable, wondering if they should help you, wondering if you're okay. This is the pause people fear, the one they try to avoid by speaking constantly. But a deliberate pause is completely different. It's characterized by ease. You stop speaking, and instead of scrambling, you settle. You take a breath. You allow yourself to think, to check in with yourself about what you want to say next. There's no emergency, no sense that you need to rescue yourself. You're simply taking a moment. And your listener doesn't feel uncomfortable. They feel attentive. They sense that you're about to say something worth waiting for. This pause doesn't weaken your authority. It strengthens it. The difference between these two types of pauses is not in the pause itself. It's in your relationship to silence. If you experience silence as something dangerous, as a gap that exposes your inadequacy, then your pauses will always feel anxious, both to you and to others. But if you experience silence as natural, as a necessary part of thoughtful communication, then your pauses become powerful. They create rhythm. They give your words time to resonate. They demonstrate confidence because they show you're not afraid of space. Learning to pause deliberately is one of the most transformative practices for clear speaking. And it's simple. When you're speaking and you notice yourself about to fill a gap with unnecessary words, with filler like or or sort of, just stop. Let there be silence. Feel the urge to fill it, the discomfort that arises, and don't act on it. Just breathe. Just be present. And then, when you're ready, when the next clear thought has formed, continue. At first, this will feel excruciating. The silence will seem to last forever. But with practice, you'll discover that what feels like 10 seconds to you is actually 2 seconds to your listener. And you'll start to appreciate the power of that space. There's also the matter of pace, which is closely related to pauses. Many people speak quickly because they're anxious, because they want to get through what they're saying as fast as possible, because they're afraid of losing people's attention or being interrupted. But fast speech is almost always less clear than slow speech. When you speak quickly, you give yourself less time to think, less time to choose words precisely, less time to notice if you're being clear. And you give your listener less time to process, to connect your words with their own understanding, to follow your meaning. Slow speech requires confidence. It requires you to trust that what you're saying is worth the time it takes to say it well. It requires you to trust that people will stay with you even if you're not rushing. And when you do speak slowly, with deliberate pauses, with time for each thought to complete before moving to the next, something remarkable happens. Your words carry more weight. People listen more carefully. Your meaning lands more deeply. Not because you're saying anything different, but because you're giving your message the space it needs to be received. But slowing down is difficult if your mind is racing. If your thoughts are moving at high speed, tumbling over each other, generating faster than you can sort through them, then slowing your speech feels impossible. This is why we keep coming back to the same foundation. The quality of your speech reflects the quality of your thinking. If your thinking is calm, your speech will be calm. If your thinking is clear, your speech will be clear. You cannot speak with clarity and ease while your mind is in chaos. The external expression will always mirror the internal state. So the work of becoming more articulate is not primarily about speaking practice. It's about learning to create calm, clear mental states before you speak. It's about noticing when your mind is racing and taking time to let it settle before you try to express what's there. It's about developing the discipline to think things through, to simplify, to identify what you really want to say before you say it. And it's about building trust in silence, in pauses, in the spaces between words where meaning can breathe. This approach is completely different from traditional advice about articulation. Traditional advice focuses on symptoms. It tells you to slow down, to enunciate clearly, to organize your thoughts, to use transitions. And these things can help, superficially. But they don't address the root cause, which is mental chaos, which is thinking that hasn't been clarified, which is the attempt to speak before you're ready. And so the improvements from traditional advice are limited. You might become slightly more polished, but you'll still have that underlying sense of struggling to express yourself, of words that don't quite fit, of meaning that escapes capture. What we're pointing to here is different. It's not about learning techniques for better speaking. It's about developing a different relationship with your own mind, learning to work with your thinking rather than against it, learning to trust the process of clarification rather than rushing to expression. And when you do this, when you really do this, articulation stops being a problem. Not because you've mastered some skill, but because the obstacle has been removed. Clear thinking flows naturally into clear speech when nothing is blocking the channel. There's also something important to understand about the relationship between articulation and authenticity. When people try to become more articulate, they often start imitating articulate speakers they admire. They adopt formal language, complex sentence structures, sophisticated vocabulary. And sometimes this works, in limited contexts. But often it backfires because it creates a disconnect between how you naturally think and how you're trying to speak. You end up sounding artificial, like you're performing articulateness rather than being articulate. Real articulation is not about sounding impressive. It's about expressing your actual thoughts as clearly as possible. And your actual thoughts, when properly clarified, are probably simpler than you imagine. They don't need fancy language. They don't need complex structures. They just need to be clear. And clarity almost always means simplicity. It means short sentences, common words, direct statements. The things that make speech powerful are not impressive vocabulary or sophisticated syntax. They're honesty, precision, and the confidence to say what you mean without decoration. This is liberating once you realize it. You don't need to sound like someone else. You don't need to adopt a speaking style that isn't yours. You just need to clarify your thinking and then express it naturally. Your natural way of speaking, when it's expressing clear thoughts, is already articulate. It might not be fancy, but it will be effective. It will communicate. It will connect. And that's what articulation is actually for, not to impress people but to be understood. So when you find yourself struggling to articulate something, the question to ask is not, how can I say this better? The question is, do I understand this clearly enough to express it? And if the answer is no, then the work is not in finding better words. The work is in thinking it through more deeply, in simplifying it, in finding the core of what you're trying to say. And once you've done that work, the words will come. Maybe not perfect words, maybe not impressive words, but words that serve their purpose, which is to carry your meaning from your mind to someone else's. This is the shift that changes everything. From seeing articulation as a speaking skill to seeing it as a thinking skill. From trying to fix your words to trying to clarify your thoughts. From adding complexity to removing it. From fearing silence to using it. From rushing to slow down. From trying to sound impressive to simply being clear. Each of these shifts might seem small, but together they transform how you communicate. They move you from effortful, anxious speaking to natural, confident expression. Not because you've learned new techniques, but because you've removed the obstacles that were blocking what was always there. Chapter 4: Control while speaking, guidance, not reaction. To truly have control during a conversation is not about controlling what you say. It is about being aware of that internal movement, that first reaction, which comes before you speak. Because before you begin to speak, that first movement in your mind has already determined the direction. If that movement is reactive, no matter how proper your words are, they carry within them a defense, a hurry, and uncertainty. And the person across from you feels this. They may not know why, but they feel it. Because people read energy before they listen to words. Now let me tell you something. The deepest layer of speaking ability is related to that silent moment before speaking. What do you do in that moment? Do you immediately prepare to respond, or do you first take a stance inside? Most people prepare their response while listening. They begin constructing their own sentence before the other person finishes theirs. This looks like listening, but it is not. This is waiting. There is a tremendous difference between waiting and listening. Waiting is impatiently watching for your turn to come. Listening is actually taking in what the person across from you is saying. If you take it in, your response comes naturally. If you respond without taking it in, you have reacted. And reaction is always a form of defense. Control, however, comes from where there is no defense. Now we need to talk about emotional reactions here. This is the most common point where conversation gets sabotaged. Someone says something to you and immediately something stirs inside. A discomfort, an objection, a fear, perhaps anger. And you immediately try to suppress that emotion, try to maintain a calm expression on your face, but inside you tense up. Then you speak. But your tone comes out a bit harsh. Or your words become a bit sharper. Or you speed up. Or the complete opposite, you speak excessively slowly and controlled because you are afraid of exploding. In both cases, you have not lost control perhaps, but you have forced control. And forced control is not real control. Real control is being aware of the emotion without suppressing it. It is staying there with it, without trying to manage it. This awareness opens a space for you. And in that space, the right response emerges by itself. Most people see conversation as a match. The other person says something, they immediately respond. Speed seems important. Responding immediately, being ready, leaving no gaps. But the truth is, leaving a gap is powerful. Silence is powerful. When the person across from you finishes their sentence, if you wait 2 seconds, what happens? Does the world collapse? No. But in those 2 seconds, the person across from you feels the weight of what they said. And you give your response from a clearer place. This small pause gives you tremendous power. Because you are no longer reacting. You are guiding. And the person across from you feels this too. When speaking with you, they do not feel the need to hurry. Because you are not hurrying either. This builds trust. And trust is the foundation of communication. Now let us talk about tone of voice. Tone of voice carries more than words. The same sentence takes on completely different meanings with different tones. You can say, "I understand." If there is harshness in your voice, it actually means, "I do not understand and I do not want to discuss this." If it is soft but clear, it says you truly understand. If it is uncertain and shaky, it actually says you are not sure. Your tone of voice is the mirror of your inner world. And if there is confusion in your inner world, it will be in your tone of voice too. Therefore, the way to correct your tone of voice is to first see the confusion inside. Trying to control your tone of voice is forcing. But when you find the clarity inside, your tone of voice naturally settles. It becomes calm. But not weak. It becomes clear. But not harsh. This balance only comes from an internal stance. Tempo works the same way. Speaking fast is usually a sign of restlessness. There is hurry. Either you fear the person across from you will interrupt you, or that you will forget what you want to say, or you think silence is uncomfortable. But the truth is, speaking fast does not make you appear strong. On the contrary, it reflects an inner anxiety. Speaking slowly does not mean deliberately lowering the tempo. Deliberate slowness appears artificial. Real slowness is confidence in not hurrying. You know you have time to say what you want to say. And this knowledge relaxes you. When you relax, the tempo settles by itself. Neither too fast nor too slow. Exactly as it should be. This is natural rhythm. And when you find this rhythm, your speech becomes fluid. The person across from you does not struggle to listen to you. Because you are not struggling to speak either. Conscious pauses are the most critical element of this balance. When you finish a sentence, you do not have to immediately move to the next one. When you complete a thought, you can pause for a moment and breathe. This pause also gives the listener space to think. And at the same time, it gives you space to find clarity inside for forming your next sentence. Most people fear pausing. They think silence is emptiness. But silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence. As long as you speak, you are saying things. But when you become silent, you are showing that you are there in that moment. And this is a powerful energy. If the person across from you is comfortable in this silence, they are truly connecting with you. If they are uncomfortable, perhaps you are uncomfortable too. Silence is the clearest indicator of your internal state. Now let me tell you something else. Silence carries messages. It is not an empty space. On the contrary, it is a full space. Without saying anything, you can say a great deal. The person across from you says something and you do not respond. You just look. What does this look mean? It means you are listening. It means you heard. It means you took it in. And this is more powerful than any words. Because words are often used to cover up. Silence does not cover. It reveals. And if there is clarity inside, silence reflects this. If there is confusion, that is reflected too. Therefore, being comfortable with silence is the most advanced point of speaking ability. Because silence shows you as you are. And if you are clear where you are, silence strengthens you. So how do you apply all of this? During a conversation, how do you move from reacting to guiding? The first step is awareness. In your next conversation, just observe one thing. While the person across from you is speaking, what are you doing? Are you listening, or are you preparing a response? If you are preparing a response, notice this. Do not judge, just notice. This awareness already initiates a change. Because something you notice can no longer exert an unconscious force over you. You are seeing it. And what you see can change. It is that simple. The second step is taking a stance inside. While the person across from you is speaking, say this to yourself inside: I am here right now. I do not need to hurry. I will hear and I will respond. This small internal sentence stabilizes you. It takes you out of reactivity. And in that moment, you create a control point. You are no longer in autopilot mode. You are conscious. And when you are conscious, the right thing already emerges. The third step is the practice of pausing. When the person across from you finishes their sentence, do not respond immediately. Wait 2 seconds. This may feel strange at first. Perhaps you might feel a bit clumsy. But continue. Because these 2 seconds open a tremendous space for you. Is there an emotional reaction inside? You see it? Is there clarity inside? You feel it? And then you speak. This small change transforms the entire quality of your speech. Because now your response is not reactive, it is conscious. And conscious responses are always more powerful. The fourth step is observing your tone of voice. While speaking, listen to your voice. How is it coming out? Tense or relaxed? Harsh or soft? Fast or slow? This observation connects you with yourself. And in this connection, a natural adjustment happens. Your voice softens by itself, your tempo balances by itself. Because now you are there. Not autopilot, but the real you. And the real you always speaks more balanced. The fifth step is accepting silence. There will be silent moments during a conversation. Allow this. Do not try to fill it. Stand in that silence. You may be uncomfortable perhaps. But stand with that discomfort. Because that discomfort is actually the breaking of a habit. The habit of constantly speaking, constantly filling. And when this habit breaks, a new space opens. The space where you feel the power of silence. And when you enter that space, your conversations completely change. Because now speaking is not a compulsion but a choice. And what you choose is always more meaningful. Now, let us go over everything I have said. Control while speaking is not forcing, it is being conscious. Not reacting is not suppressing, it is being aware. Correcting tone of voice is not imitating, it is finding clarity inside. Adjusting tempo is not slowing down or speeding up, it is finding natural rhythm. Making pauses is not a deliberate technique, it is the natural result of ease and confidence. And using silence is not a tactic, it is the expression of your presence. All of these cannot be taught from the outside. Because these are not techniques. These are reflections of an internal stance. If there is clarity inside, there will be clarity outside. If there is confusion inside, no technique covers this. Therefore, the most valuable thing I can give you in this chapter is this: speaking ability begins before speaking. In that first internal movement, that first reaction, that first awareness. If you can see there, your speech corrects itself. If you cannot see, no matter how much you practice, you hit a limit. Because real change happens not outside, but inside. And let me also say this: having control while speaking is not dominating the conversation. On the contrary, it is serving the conversation. Serving not yourself, but communication. Serving not the person across from you, but understanding. Not satisfying ego, but creating clarity. And this difference changes everything. Because when you strive for control, you actually lose control. But when you focus on serving, control comes by itself. This is the paradox. And when you understand this paradox, speaking no longer remains a struggle. It becomes a flow. And in that flow, everything becomes easy. Now, as I finish this chapter, I want to tell you one last thing. Control while speaking is not a matter of reaching a destination. It is a process. Every day you become a bit more aware. In every conversation you become a bit clearer. Sometimes you go backward. Sometimes you become reactive. Sometimes you hurry. This is normal. What matters is that when you see these things, you do not judge yourself. You just notice. Because awareness by itself is transformative. When you do not try to change yourself, change happens by itself. And this change is permanent. Because it is not forced. It has emerged naturally. Control while speaking, guidance not reaction, this is where real mastery begins. You are no longer someone who reacts to events. You are someone who guides events, but guides without forcing. You can stand within the flow without interfering with the flow. And this stance gives you tremendous freedom. Because you are no longer a slave to conversation. You are not the master of conversation either. You are within the conversation. You are together with it. And this togetherness is the most powerful form of communication. Because there is neither defense nor attack. Neither ego nor fear. Only clarity. And clarity is always sufficient. In your next conversation, just try this. Do not try to change anything. Just notice. What is happening inside? Notice. What are you doing outside? Notice. And then let go. Do not force. Just be aware. That is all. And this awareness will slowly transform you. Without noticing, one day you will find yourself speaking much more comfortably. Expressing much more clearly. Tiring much less. Because you are no longer reacting. You are guiding. And guiding is always easier. Because you are not against the flow, you are with the flow. This is control. Control without forcing. The deepest, most lasting, most real control. And when you truly embody this understanding, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing conversations as performances where you must prove something. You stop measuring your worth by how quickly you respond or how cleverly you phrase things. Instead, you begin to see each conversation as an opportunity for genuine connection, for real understanding to occur. This shift in perspective is subtle but profound. It changes the entire energy you bring into any exchange of words. Consider for a moment how exhausting it is to constantly be on guard, constantly preparing your next statement, constantly evaluating whether you sound intelligent or confident enough. This exhaustion is not physical. It is mental and emotional. It drains you because you are fighting against your own nature. You are trying to be something other than what you are. And this effort, no matter how well-intentioned, creates a barrier between you and authentic communication. The person across from you might not be able to articulate it, but they sense this barrier. They feel that they are not talking to the real you, but to a constructed version, a defended version. When you let go of this need to construct and defend, when you simply allow yourself to be present with whatever arises in the moment, a natural intelligence emerges. This intelligence is not something you have to manufacture or rehearse. It is already there, waiting beneath all the noise of your anxious thoughts and protective mechanisms. It knows what to say and when to say it. It knows when to speak and when to be silent. It knows how to respond to aggression with calm, to confusion with clarity, to pain with compassion. But it can only operate when you are not in its way, when you are not trying to control the outcome of every interaction. This is why the practice of pausing is so transformative. It creates a gap between stimulus and response. Someone says something that normally would trigger an immediate reaction in you, perhaps defensiveness or the need to correct them or the urge to fill the silence with nervous chatter. But in that pause, in those 2 or 3 seconds of conscious silence, you give yourself the chance to choose. Not to suppress your reaction, but to see it clearly. To feel the tension in your chest, the tightness in your throat, the racing of your thoughts. And in seeing these things, they begin to lose their grip on you. They are no longer running the show. You are no longer a puppet dancing to the strings of your conditioning and habits. People often ask me how to develop confidence in speaking. And my answer is always the same. You cannot develop confidence by pretending to be confident. You cannot fake your way into genuine self-assurance. Confidence is not a costume you put on or a role you play. It is the natural byproduct of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. When you know yourself, when you have seen your fears and your insecurities and your reactive patterns without judgment, when you have sat with them and understood them, they no longer have the power to destabilize you. And when they cannot destabilize you, you naturally become more grounded, more centered, more present. This groundedness is what others perceive as confidence. It is not loud or showy. It does not need to announce itself. It simply is. The same principle applies to every aspect of speaking we have discussed. Your tone of voice, your tempo, your use of pauses and silence, none of these things should be techniques you apply from the outside. They should be natural expressions of your internal state. And your internal state becomes clear and stable through awareness, through the simple practice of watching yourself without trying to change yourself. This watching, this witnessing of your own inner processes, gradually dissolves the patterns that do not serve you. It is like the sun melting ice. The sun does not struggle to melt the ice. It simply shines, and the ice cannot help but melt. Your awareness is like that sun. It does not force change. It simply illuminates, and change happens naturally in the light of that illumination. Now I want to address something that often causes confusion. When I say do not react, do not try to control, do not force, some people interpret this as passivity, as becoming weak or submissive. This is a complete misunderstanding. Not reacting is not the same as not responding. Not controlling is not the same as being controlled. Not forcing is not the same as being passive. In fact, the opposite is true. When you stop reacting, you become capable of responding powerfully and appropriately. When you stop trying to control, you discover real influence. When you stop forcing, you find genuine strength. This strength is quiet but unshakable. It does not need to dominate or intimidate. It simply stands in its own truth, clear and unwavering. Think about the most powerful people you have encountered in your life. I am not talking about people with titles or positions or wealth. I am talking about people whose presence made you feel safe, whose words carried weight not because they were loud but because they were true, whose silence was comfortable rather than awkward. What quality did these people have? They were present. They were there, fully there, not distracted by their own thoughts about how they appeared or what they should say next. Their attention was with you, with the moment, with what was actually happening rather than with their mental commentary about what was happening. And this presence, this simple act of being fully there, is the most powerful thing you can bring to any conversation. But presence is not something you can will into being. You cannot make yourself be present through effort. Effort itself is a form of thinking, a form of being in your head rather than in the moment. Presence happens when thinking subsides, when you stop narrating your experience to yourself and simply experience it directly. And thinking subsides when you stop feeding it, when you stop believing that every thought that appears is important and true and must be attended to. Most of your thoughts during a conversation are useless. They are repetitive, anxious, self-referential. They add nothing. And when you see this clearly, you naturally pay less attention to them. Not by suppressing them, but by seeing that they have no substance, no real value. And as you pay less attention to these thoughts, the space of presence naturally opens up. In this presence, speaking becomes effortless. Words come when they are needed. Silence comes when it is needed. Your tone is appropriate, your tempo is natural, your pauses occur exactly where they should. But none of this is calculated. It is spontaneous. And it is spontaneous because you are not in your own way, not second-guessing yourself, not performing for an imaginary audience. You are simply communicating with another human being, allowing the intelligence of the moment to guide you. This intelligence knows things your thinking mind does not know. It knows when to be gentle and when to be firm. It knows when to speak and when to listen. It knows when to challenge and when to support. But it cannot operate through the noise of your mental chatter, through your fears about how you are being perceived, through your strategies about how to appear smart or confident or likable. All of that must be set aside, not through effort but through seeing that it serves no real purpose. So as you move forward, as you enter into conversations in your daily life, remember this. You do not need to become someone different. You do not need to acquire new skills or memorize new techniques. You simply need to stop interfering with your own natural intelligence. You need to stop being at war with yourself, stop trying to be something other than what you are. And this stopping is not passive. It is the most active thing you can do. It requires vigilance, requires constant watching of your own mind, requires catching yourself in the act of performing or defending or trying to control. But this vigilance becomes lighter over time, becomes less effortful, until it is simply how you are. And when you are this way, when you speak from this place of presence and clarity, people respond differently to you. They trust you more. They open up to you. They feel safe to be themselves around you. Not because you are saying the right things or using the right techniques, but because there is no pretense in you, no hidden agenda, no need to be anything other than what you are. And this authenticity, this simple realness, is magnetic. It draws people in. It creates the space for genuine communication to happen. And genuine communication is rare. Most of what passes for communication is just people taking turns speaking, waiting for their chance to say what they have already decided to say, not really listening, not really connecting. But when you bring presence, when you bring real listening, when you bring the willingness to not know what you will say until the moment you say it, real communication becomes possible. And in that real communication, something extraordinary happens. Both people are changed by it. Both people walk away a little different than they were before. This is the power of speaking from silence, from presence, from that place in you that is already whole and already knows what it needs to know. Chapter 5, From Inner Confidence to Outer Impact. There is a quality that some people possess when they speak that is immediately recognizable, though difficult to define. It is not volume or charisma or the clever arrangement of words. It is something deeper, something that radiates from within and colors everything they say. When such a person speaks, you listen not because you have to, but because you want to. Their words carry weight. Their presence commands attention without demanding it. And you sense, even if you cannot articulate it, that this person is speaking from a place of internal solidity, from a foundation that does not shift with circumstances or opinions or the judgments of others. This quality is what we call inner confidence, though the term itself can be misleading. Confidence is often confused with bravado, with the loud assertion of one's views, with the ability to speak without hesitation or doubt. But true confidence is nothing like this. True confidence is quiet. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need to prove anything. It simply exists, as naturally as breath, as effortlessly as the beating of your heart. And it shows itself not in what you say, but in how you are while you say it. The person with genuine inner confidence does not perform. They simply present. They do not convince. They simply communicate. And this difference, subtle as it may seem, changes everything. When you speak from inner confidence, there is no anxiety about how you are being received. This does not mean you do not care about the other person or about communicating effectively. It means you are not desperate for validation. You are not scanning their face for signs of approval or disapproval. You are not adjusting your words mid-sentence based on their reaction. You say what you have to say, clearly and completely, and then you stop. You do not over-explain. You do not justify. You do not apologize for taking up space with your thoughts. You simply deliver your message and allow it to land however it lands. And paradoxically, this very lack of neediness, this absence of the desperate energy that says please like me, please agree with me, please think I am smart, this absence itself makes people more receptive to what you say. People are exquisitely sensitive to neediness. They may not consciously identify it, but they feel it. And when they feel it, something in them withdraws. Because neediness is uncomfortable. It places a demand on them. It asks them to fill a gap in you, to provide something you lack. And most people, whether they realize it or not, resist this demand. They pull back from it. But when you speak without need, when you are complete within yourself regardless of how your words are received, people relax. They can simply hear what you are saying without feeling pressured to respond in a particular way. And in that relaxation, real communication becomes possible. They are free to consider your words, to agree or disagree, to be moved or unmoved, without feeling that your sense of self depends on their response. And this freedom, this lack of pressure, actually makes them more likely to be genuinely engaged with what you are saying. Now, let us explore what it means to have the stance of a person who can express themselves. This stance is not a posture you adopt. It is not something external. It is an internal orientation, a way of being with yourself that then naturally expresses itself in how you speak. The person who can truly express themselves has made peace with their own thoughts and feelings. They are not at war with themselves. They do not have one part trying to speak while another part is frantically trying to censor or edit or improve what is being said. There is an internal unity, a coherence. What they think, what they feel, and what they say are not in conflict. They are aligned. And this alignment creates a kind of power, a kind of presence that is unmistakable. Most people do not have this alignment. Most people are divided within themselves. One part wants to say something honest, another part fears the consequences of that honesty. One part feels angry, another part thinks anger is unacceptable and must be hidden. One part has a genuine insight, another part doubts whether that insight is valuable or whether others will think it is stupid. And so when they speak, what comes out is compromise, a watered-down version of what they actually think and feel, filtered through multiple layers of fear and self-doubt. The words are there, but the life has gone out of them. The authenticity has been squeezed out. And everyone listening senses this, even if they cannot name it. They sense that they are not getting the real person, but a carefully constructed version designed to avoid criticism or rejection or conflict. The person with inner confidence has transcended this internal division. Not because they have no fears or doubts, but because they have seen those fears and doubts clearly and decided not to be ruled by them. They have understood that the worst thing that can happen, being disapproved of, being criticized, being rejected, is not actually that terrible. It is uncomfortable, certainly. It is unpleasant. But it is not devastating. It does not destroy you. And once you truly understand this, once you have felt the discomfort of disapproval and realized that you survived it, that you remained intact, something fundamental shifts. The fear loses its power over you. Not completely, perhaps. Fear may still arise. But it no longer controls your behavior. You can feel the fear and speak anyway. You can notice the anxiety about how you will be received and choose to express yourself clearly anyway. This is courage. Not the absence of fear, but action in the presence of fear. And when you speak with this kind of courage, people feel it. They may not agree with you. They may even be angered or challenged by what you say. But they respect it. Because they sense that you are saying what you actually believe, not what you think they want to hear. There is no manipulation in it, no hidden agenda, no attempt to manage their perception of you. You are simply being honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, even when unwelcome, has a kind of authority. It commands attention and respect in a way that carefully calibrated, people-pleasing speech never can. Now let us talk about what it means to stop defending yourself while speaking. This is one of the most subtle but important shifts you can make. Most people, when they express an opinion or share a thought, immediately go into defense mode. They can feel the vulnerability of having put something of themselves out into the world, and their instinct is to protect it. So they over-explain. They preemptively address objections. They hedge their statements with qualifiers like maybe, I think, possibly, it seems to me. They apologize before they have even said anything that requires an apology. All of this is defense. All of this is attempting to make yourself smaller, less offensive, less likely to be attacked. But here is what happens when you do this. You undermine your own message. You drain the power from your words. Because when you are defending something, you are implicitly admitting that it needs defense, that it is weak or questionable. And the listener picks up on this immediately. If you do not believe in what you are saying enough to state it clearly and directly, without hedging or apologizing, why should they believe in it? Your defensive energy actually creates the very doubt and skepticism you are trying to avoid. Contrast this with someone who states their view simply and directly, without apology or qualification. I think this is the best approach. Not I think maybe this might possibly be a good approach, but I could be wrong. Just a clear, clean statement. This does not mean you are claiming to be infallible. It does not mean you are closed to other perspectives. It simply means you are willing to stand behind your own thinking. You are willing to put your view out there and let it be evaluated on its merits, rather than trying to preemptively soften it to avoid criticism. When you stop defending yourself while speaking, you discover something surprising. People actually challenge you less. Because there is nothing to push against. When you are defensive, you create resistance. People sense the weakness and are more likely to attack it, like predators sensing wounded prey. But when you are clear and undefended, when you state your view and simply stop, allowing space for response without trying to control what that response will be, people are more likely to engage with the substance of what you said rather than attacking the defensive energy around it. This does not happen overnight. Stopping the defensive habit is a practice. You will catch yourself hedging, over-explaining, apologizing unnecessarily. When you notice this, you do not need to judge yourself. Just notice it. See it clearly. And in the seeing, you create the possibility of choosing differently next time. Gradually, over time, the defensive patterns weaken. You become more comfortable with the vulnerability of clear expression. You discover that you can say what you mean without wrapping it in layers of protection, and not only do you survive, you actually communicate more effectively. Now let us explore the chain that connects clarity, confidence, and impact. This chain is fundamental to understanding how inner confidence translates into outer effect. It begins with clarity. Clarity is not just about using clear words or well-structured sentences, though those things matter. Clarity is primarily an internal quality. It is knowing what you think and feel. It is having sorted through the confusion and contradiction and arrived at something definite, something you can stand on. Most people lack this clarity. Their thoughts are a jumble, a mass of half-formed opinions, unexamined assumptions, borrowed ideas, and emotional reactions all mixed together. And when they try to speak from this muddle, the muddle comes across. Their speech is vague, uncertain, meandering. They talk around the point without ever quite landing on it. But when you have done the work of clarifying your own thinking, when you have sat with a question or issue until you genuinely understand your own position on it, something changes. You can now speak with precision. You can say what you mean without excess words. You can go straight to the heart of the matter. And this clarity itself generates confidence. Because you know what you are talking about. Not in the sense of knowing everything or being certain you are right, but in the sense of having a clear understanding of your own perspective. You are not making it up as you go along. You are not frantically trying to figure out what you think while simultaneously trying to articulate it. The thinking has been done beforehand, in silence, in reflection. And now you are simply reporting the results of that thinking. This clarity-based confidence is completely different from false confidence, from the loud assertions of someone who is actually uncertain but trying to hide it. False confidence is brittle. It breaks when challenged. It becomes defensive or aggressive when questioned. But confidence that arises from clarity is flexible and resilient. It can withstand challenge because it is not based on the need to be right or to dominate. It is based on genuine understanding. And genuine understanding does not fear questions or disagreement. It welcomes them as opportunities to test and refine and deepen that understanding. And confidence, in turn, creates impact. Impact is the effect your words have on others. When you speak with genuine confidence, born of clarity, people pay attention. Not because you are loud or aggressive or charismatic, but because there is substance in what you say. There is something real being communicated. And people are starved for reality, for authenticity, for communication that is not just social performance or manipulation or empty rhetoric. When they encounter someone speaking from a place of real clarity and confidence, they respond. They lean in. They listen more carefully. They take what is said seriously. This is the chain: clarity leads to confidence, and confidence creates impact. But notice the direction of causality. It does not start with impact and work backward. You cannot create real impact by trying to be impactful. You cannot generate genuine confidence by pretending to be confident. You have to start at the beginning, with clarity. You have to do the internal work of understanding yourself, of knowing what you think and feel and believe. And from that foundation, everything else follows naturally. Now, there is something important to understand about this process. The clarity I am talking about does not mean having everything figured out. It does not mean never being uncertain or confused. Life is complex and ambiguous, and anyone who claims to have definitive answers to every question is either lying or self-deluded. The clarity I am pointing to is more subtle. It is the ability to distinguish between what you know and what you do not know. It is the ability to say, I am certain about this, uncertain about that, and completely ignorant about this other thing with equal ease and honesty. This too is a form of clarity. And it actually generates more trust and respect than false certainty does. When someone speaks with this kind of nuanced clarity, acknowledging what they know and what they do not, people trust them more. Because they are clearly not trying to manipulate or impress. They are simply being honest about the state of their understanding. And this honesty creates safety. The listener knows they are not being sold something, not being manipulated, not being fed a line. They are simply being given one person's honest perspective, offered without attachment to whether it is accepted or rejected. This brings us to a crucial point about impact. Real impact is not about controlling how people respond to you. It is not about making people agree with you or like you or do what you want. Those things may or may not happen, and they are not really in your control anyway. Real impact is about communicating clearly and authentically, delivering your message as purely as possible, and then releasing attachment to the outcome. This release is not indifference. You still care about communicating effectively. But you are not desperate for a particular response. You are not measuring your worth or your success by whether people react the way you hope they would. This distinction is vital. When you are attached to a particular outcome, when you need people to respond in a certain way, that neediness infects your communication. It makes you manipulative, even if subtly. You find yourself adjusting your message to increase the likelihood of getting the response you want. You start performing, calculating, strategizing. And all of this takes you away from authentic expression, from simply saying what is true for you and allowing it to be what it is. But when you speak without attachment to outcome, something magical happens. You become much more effective. Because you are no longer in your own way. You are not tangled up in anxiety about how you are being received. You are not distracted by mental calculations about what to say next to maximize impact. You are simply present, simply communicating, and your message comes through clear and unobstructed. And this unobstructed communication has a natural power that calculated, strategic communication lacks. It is the difference between water flowing naturally downhill and water being pumped uphill through pipes. Both move the water, but one is effortless and natural while the other requires constant energy and maintenance. Let me share something with you about the nature of genuine confidence that often surprises people. Genuine confidence does not feel the way most people expect it to feel. Most people imagine that if they were truly confident, they would feel strong, bold, maybe even invincible. But genuine confidence is quieter than that. It feels more like settledness, like being at home in yourself. There is no strain in it, no effort. You are not pumping yourself up or giving yourself pep talks. You are simply resting in the knowledge of who you are, comfortable with your strengths and at peace with your limitations. This kind of confidence does not fluctuate wildly based on external circumstances. It is not contingent on having a good day or receiving praise or being in a situation where you feel comfortable. It is there in the background, steady and consistent, because it is based on self-knowledge rather than self-image. Self-image is fragile. It is constructed from how you think others see you, from your successes and failures, from comparing yourself to others. And because it is constructed, it can be damaged or destroyed. A criticism, a failure, a comparison that comes out badly, any of these can shake your self-image and plunge you into doubt and insecurity. But self-knowledge is different. Self-knowledge is simply seeing yourself clearly, seeing your patterns and tendencies, your strengths and weaknesses, your fears and desires, without judgment or distortion. And when you see yourself clearly, you do not need to construct an image. You do not need to pretend to be something you are not. You can simply be what you are, and this is enormously liberating. Because you are no longer carrying the exhausting burden of maintaining a false front, of trying to appear confident or intelligent or capable. You are simply being yourself, and confidence arises naturally from this authenticity. Now, I want to address a common misconception. Some people hear this talk of inner confidence and authenticity and they think it means being unfiltered, saying whatever comes to mind without consideration for others, justifying rudeness or insensitivity in the name of being authentic. This is not what I am pointing to at all. Authenticity does not mean being thoughtless. It does not mean dumping your unprocessed emotions onto others. It does not give you license to be cruel or careless with your words. True authenticity includes awareness of impact. When you are genuinely clear and confident, you can be honest without being brutal. You can be direct without being harsh. You can express disagreement without being disrespectful. Because you are not driven by the need to prove yourself or defend yourself or attack others. You are simply communicating clearly, and clear communication takes into account the person you are speaking to, their context, their sensitivities, their current state. This is not manipulation. It is consideration. It is recognizing that how you say something matters as much as what you say. The person with genuine inner confidence can be soft or firm as the situation requires. They are not locked into one mode of expression. They do not always have to be strong or always have to be nice. They can adapt their style to what the moment needs, because they are not rigidly identified with any particular way of being. They are fluid, responsive, alive to the nuances of each unique interaction. This flexibility is possible precisely because they are not defensive, not trying to maintain a particular image. They can be whatever the moment calls for without losing their center, without losing touch with who they are. Let us now explore how this inner stance translates into outer impact in practical terms. When you walk into a room, before you say a single word, people are already reading you. They are picking up on your energy, your posture, the quality of your presence. Are you anxious or calm? Are you seeking approval or grounded in yourself? Are you trying to make an impression or simply being present? All of this is communicated non-verbally, and it sets the stage for everything that follows. The person with inner confidence enters a space differently. There is no fanfare, no need to announce themselves or draw attention. But there is also no shrinking, no trying to be invisible. They simply enter and take their place, as naturally as a tree stands in a field. And people notice this. They may not consciously think that person is confident, but they feel a certain gravitational pull, a sense that this is someone worth paying attention to. And when this person speaks, their words carry weight. Not because the words themselves are particularly clever or eloquent, but because there is a solid presence behind them. You sense that these words are coming from somewhere real, not just from the surface level of social performance. And this quality of realness makes you listen differently. You are not just hearing words. You are encountering another human being in a moment of genuine expression. And such moments, though they may seem ordinary, are actually quite rare and quite precious. The impact of such communication extends beyond the immediate conversation. People remember how you made them feel. They remember the quality of presence you brought. They remember whether you were really there with them or just going through the motions. And over time, this reputation builds. You become known as someone whose words can be trusted, someone who says what they mean and means what they say. This is not a reputation you set out to build. It is simply the natural consequence of consistent authenticity, of speaking from clarity and confidence rather than from fear and the need for approval. There is also something to be said about the energy you preserve when you are not constantly defending yourself, not constantly managing how others perceive you. This self-protective effort is exhausting. It consumes tremendous amounts of energy that could be used for other things. When you let go of this effort, when you stop trying to control how you are seen, you discover reserves of energy you did not know you had. You are less tired at the end of social interactions. You recover more quickly. You have more vitality because you are not bleeding energy through the constant effort of self-protection and image management. And this energy becomes available for actual connection, for genuine curiosity about others, for creative thinking, for presence. You can actually listen to what others are saying instead of being caught up in how you are going to respond or how you are being perceived. You can be genuinely interested in others instead of using them as mirrors to reflect back the image you are trying to maintain. This shift, from self-preoccupation to genuine openness, is felt by everyone you interact with. And it transforms the quality of your relationships. Now, as we move toward the close of this chapter, I want to leave you with something essential, something that ties together everything we have explored. The message is simple but profound. To speak powerfully, you do not need more words. You do not need better techniques. You do not need to learn how to be more persuasive or charismatic or impressive. What you need is less mental noise. You need to quiet the internal chatter, the constant commentary, the anxious self-monitoring, the fearful predictions, the regretful replays. All of this noise obscures your natural clarity. It interferes with your natural confidence. It prevents your authentic self from emerging and expressing itself naturally. Think about it. When are you most articulate, most clear, most impactful in your speech? It is not when you are trying hard, when you are carefully crafting each sentence, when you are monitoring yourself anxiously. It is when you are relaxed, when you are engaged with what you are talking about, when you momentarily forget yourself and simply speak from what you know or feel or understand. In those moments, the words flow. They come easily. You do not struggle or strain. You are simply expressing, and it feels effortless. What makes those moments possible? The absence of mental noise. In those moments, your mind is quiet enough that your natural intelligence can operate. You are not interfering with yourself. You are not in your own way. And so your authentic voice emerges, clear and strong and unobstructed. This is the state you want to cultivate. Not through effort, but through the progressive release of effort, through the gradual letting go of all the ways you interfere with your own natural capacity for clear expression. And how do you reduce mental noise? Not by fighting it. Not by trying to suppress your thoughts or force your mind to be quiet. Fighting with your thoughts just creates more noise. The way to reduce mental noise is to stop taking your thoughts so seriously. To see them for what they are. Just thoughts, just mental events arising and passing away, not truths that must be believed and acted upon. When you see this clearly, when you recognize that most of what your mind is telling you is just habitual chatter with no real substance, you naturally give those thoughts less attention. And as you give them less attention, they quiet down. Not because you are suppressing them, but because you are no longer feeding them with your belief and attention. This process of mental quieting is gradual. It happens through consistent awareness, through repeatedly noticing when you are caught in mental noise and gently disengaging from it. Over time, the noise diminishes. Not completely, perhaps. The mind may always generate thoughts. But the volume decreases. The thoughts lose their grip on you. And in the spaces between thoughts, in the moments of relative quiet, you discover something remarkable. You discover that you already know how to communicate clearly and powerfully. You have always known. It is your natural state. It was just obscured by noise. As you move forward from this chapter, from this exploration of inner confidence and outer impact, I invite you to experiment with this. Instead of trying to improve your speaking, instead of working on techniques or practicing certain behaviors, simply notice the noise. Notice when your mind is spinning with anxious thoughts about how you are being perceived. Notice when you are defending yourself unnecessarily. Notice when you are trying to control the outcome of a conversation. Just notice these things, without judgment, without trying to change them. The noticing itself is transformative. In seeing these patterns clearly, they begin to loosen their hold on you. And as they loosen, as the noise decreases, your natural clarity emerges. Your authentic confidence becomes evident. And your impact becomes effortless. Not because you are doing something special, but because you have stopped doing all the unnecessary things that were interfering with your natural capacity to connect and communicate. This is the ultimate simplicity. This is the essence of powerful expression. Not addition, but subtraction. Not learning more, but unlearning what was never true. Not becoming someone new, but discovering who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and fear and self-doubt. You are already whole. You already have everything you need to communicate with clarity and confidence and impact. The work is not to add anything, but to remove what is in the way. To clear the obstructions. To quiet the noise. And in that clearing, in that quieting, your authentic voice emerges naturally, like a spring that was always there but had been covered over. And when you speak from that place, from that authentic voice, people listen. Not because you are manipulating them or using clever techniques, but because they are encountering something real. And reality, pure and unadorned, always has power. Always has impact. Always matters. So let go of trying. Let go of striving to be confident or impressive or impactful. Instead, simply become aware of how you interfere with your own natural capacities. See the patterns of defense and noise and fear. And in seeing them, allow them to dissolve. What remains is not something you create. It is something you discover. The confident, clear, impactful communicator you have always been, just waiting to emerge from beneath the noise. This is not a promise of what you will become. It is a recognition of what you already are. Conclusion: the return to simplicity. We have traveled together through these chapters, exploring the nature of clear thinking and powerful speaking. And if you have been paying attention, you may have noticed something curious. We have not been adding complexity. We have been removing it. We have not been learning new techniques. We have been unlearning old interferences. The entire journey has been a movement toward simplicity, toward the recognition that you already possess everything you need to communicate with clarity and confidence. This is not the simplicity of ignorance, of not knowing enough. This is the simplicity that lies on the other side of complexity, the simplicity you arrive at after seeing through all the elaborate strategies and defenses and performances that you thought were necessary. It is the simplicity of a master who has internalized all the rules so deeply that they can now forget them and simply act from understanding. Except in this case, you are not mastering something external. You are rediscovering something internal, something that was always there but had been buried under layers of conditioning and fear. Think back to when you were a child, before you learned to be self-conscious, before you developed the habit of monitoring yourself constantly, before you began to measure your worth by how others responded to you. Do you remember how you spoke then? You simply said what you thought. You expressed what you felt. There was no filter, no calculation, no strategy. You were direct and honest and unself-conscious. And people responded to this. They may not have always liked what you said, but they knew where they stood with you. There was no guessing, no hidden agenda, no performance. What happened between then and now? You learned. You learned that speaking honestly sometimes got you into trouble. You learned that expressing your feelings could be used against you. You learned that people did not always like the real you, and so you began to construct a more acceptable version, a version designed to avoid criticism and rejection. This learning was natural, perhaps even necessary for navigating social complexity. But somewhere along the way, the constructed version became so elaborate, so encrusted with defenses and strategies, that you lost touch with the simple, direct expression that came naturally to you as a child. The work we have been doing in these chapters is not about adding more layers. It is about removing them. It is about seeing through the constructed self, the performed self, back to the simple awareness that has been there all along. And as these layers fall away, as you stop defending and performing and strategizing, something remarkable happens. You discover that you can speak powerfully without trying to be powerful. You can communicate clearly without effortful clarity. You can influence others without manipulation or force. All of this happens naturally when you are no longer in your own way. But let me be clear about something. This is not a destination you arrive at once and for all. This is not a problem you solve permanently. The habits of self-consciousness, of defensive speaking, of mental noise, these habits are deeply ingrained. They will reassert themselves. You will find yourself caught in old patterns again and again. And this is completely normal. The work is not to eliminate these patterns entirely. The work is to recognize them more quickly when they arise, to see them with increasing clarity, and to return to simplicity again and again. Each time you notice that you are defending yourself unnecessarily, and you stop, you strengthen the capacity for undefended expression. Each time you catch yourself lost in mental noise about how you are being perceived, and you return to simply being present, you deepen the ground of genuine confidence. Each time you speak from clarity rather than from the need for approval, you reinforce the neural pathways of authentic communication. This is a practice, not a destination. And like any practice, it requires patience and persistence and self-compassion. You will have conversations that go beautifully, where you speak with clarity and confidence and feel deeply connected to the person you are talking with. And you will have conversations that feel awkward and difficult, where you stumble over your words and feel self-conscious and defensive. Both kinds of conversations are valuable. The good ones show you what is possible. The difficult ones show you where work remains to be done, where old patterns are still active, where awareness has not yet fully penetrated. The question is not whether you will ever speak perfectly, always clear and confident and impactful. The question is whether you are willing to keep practicing awareness, to keep noticing when you fall into old patterns, to keep returning to simplicity and presence and authentic expression. And if you are willing to do this, if you make this an ongoing practice rather than a one-time effort, transformation is inevitable. Not because you are forcing yourself to change, but because awareness itself is transformative. Seeing clearly is healing. Understanding deeply is liberating. Now, I want to address something that may be on your mind. You may be wondering how to integrate all of this into your daily life. How do you remember to stay aware during conversations when you are caught up in the flow of interaction? How do you avoid falling back into unconscious patterns? The answer is simpler than you might think. You start small. You do not try to transform all of your communication at once. You choose one conversation, perhaps with a friend or family member, and you bring awareness to that conversation. You notice what happens inside you as you speak. You notice when you become defensive or when mental noise increases or when you start performing rather than simply expressing. That is all. Just notice. Do not judge yourself. Do not try to fix anything in the moment. Just bring the light of awareness to what is actually happening. And then, in the next conversation, do the same thing. And the next. Gradually, this awareness becomes more natural, more automatic. You find that you are noticing these patterns as they arise, rather than only seeing them in retrospect. And as your awareness becomes more real-time, you gain the ability to choose differently in the moment. Not through force of will, but through the natural intelligence that emerges when you are fully present. Another practical approach is to use silence as an anchor. In any conversation, there are natural pauses, moments of silence between exchanges. These moments are opportunities. Opportunities to return to yourself, to feel your breath, to notice what is happening in your body and mind. Instead of filling these silences with nervous chatter or anxiously preparing what to say next, simply rest in them. Use them as brief meditations, as chances to drop back into presence. This simple practice, using silence as a reset button, can dramatically change the quality of your communication. You might also find it helpful to reflect on your conversations afterward. Not obsessively, not picking apart everything you said and beating yourself up for mistakes. But simply reviewing the conversation with curiosity. What went well? When did you feel most present and authentic? When did you notice yourself becoming defensive or performing? What patterns do you see? This reflective practice helps consolidate the learning. It helps you see patterns more clearly so that you can recognize them more quickly next time. But ultimately, all of these practices point to the same thing. They are all ways of cultivating awareness, of bringing consciousness to what is usually unconscious. And awareness is the master key. It is the one tool that unlocks everything else. With awareness, old patterns can dissolve. Without awareness, you are condemned to repeat them. So whatever practices you choose, whatever approaches you find helpful, make sure they are serving this fundamental purpose of increasing awareness. If a practice makes you more self-conscious rather than more aware, drop it. If it increases mental noise rather than quieting it, let it go. The path is always toward greater simplicity, greater presence, greater ease. There is something else I want to say as we close. Throughout these chapters, we have focused on communication, on speaking and being heard and creating impact. But everything we have explored has implications far beyond communication. The awareness we have been cultivating, the clarity we have been seeking, the confidence we have been uncovering, these are not just about speaking better. They are about living better. They are about being more fully yourself in all areas of your life. When you stop defending yourself in conversation, you also stop defending yourself in your own mind. When you quiet the mental noise around how others perceive you, you also quiet the internal critic that judges and undermines you. When you discover the confidence that comes from self-knowledge rather than self-image, you carry that confidence into everything you do. The work we have been doing is not just about becoming a better communicator. It is about becoming more conscious, more present, more alive. And this is perhaps the greatest gift of this journey. Not just that you will speak more powerfully, though you will. Not just that you will connect more deeply with others, though you will. But that you will come home to yourself. You will rediscover the simple, undefended, authentic presence that has always been at your core. And from that place, everything becomes easier. Not because life becomes simpler, but because you stop making it more complicated than it needs to be. So as you finish this final chapter and return to your life, to your daily conversations and interactions, I encourage you to carry this with you. You do not need to become someone different. You do not need to acquire new skills or master new techniques. You simply need to see clearly what is already happening, to become aware of how you interfere with your own natural capacities, and to gradually let those interferences fall away. This is the work. And it is both simpler and more profound than any technique or strategy could ever be. The power to speak clearly, to communicate authentically, to connect deeply with others, this power is not something external that you must obtain. It is something internal that you must uncover. It has been there all along, waiting beneath the noise and the defense and the performance. And as you peel away these layers, as you return again and again to simplicity and presence, this power emerges naturally. Not as something you do, but as something you are. And when you speak from that place, from the depths of your authentic being, your words carry a weight and a clarity that no technique could ever provide. Because they are not just your words. They are the expression of something real, something true, something that connects us all beneath the surface differences and conflicts and misunderstandings. This is the ultimate teaching. This is what all the chapters have been pointing toward. Not a method for better communication, but a recognition of what you already are when the noise falls silent and the defenses drop away. A clear, conscious, powerful presence, capable of expressing itself with honesty and connecting with others with depth. This is your birthright. This is your natural state. And it is available to you in any moment that you choose to stop trying and simply be. May you remember this. May you return to this again and again. And may your speaking, your communication, your very presence in the world, be an expression of this simple, profound truth.